And welcome back to the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Really appreciate you guys joining us. The MLB offseason has already begun very, very fast right after the World Series. There's too many things that we were wanting to get to that we just thought we'd go ahead and do a live video. And as fast as this offseason's already moving, we're going to go ahead and do a live daily for you guys. That way you guys can stay up to date on what's happening. I know there's a baseball morning show on MLB Network, but not everybody has the ability to watch that show from 8 to 10 o'clock every single morning, so we'll bring you a live show here every single night. So make sure you subscribe to us here on YouTube so you don't miss anything. We already have a comment in here from Derpy, but before we get to that, let's get into some of the headlines already. If you've paid attention to our channel, you'd already have seen Edwin Diaz has already agreed to a 5-year, $102 million contract to stay with the New York Mets anyway. Just today, we saw the acquisition of Jake Odorizzi by the Texas Rangers in exchange for Colby Allard. The surprising part of that deal is that Texas is going to save $10 million off of the salary of Jake Odorizzi. Why is that? The Atlanta Braves wanted to save at least a little bit of money. It doesn't sound like they wanted to keep Jake Odorizzi around anyway, but we'll see what ends up happening. But for Jake Odorizzi, he's going to be a great fifth starter for the Texas Rangers. He had a $12.5 million player option coming into the offseason and opted into that contract. He worked to a 4.4 earned run average so far this past season anyway, and didn't exactly perform great in the postseason, unfortunately. The Atlanta Braves have a plethora of good young starting pitchers on their roster already. They have a star profile free agent anyway at the shortstop position. They're supposedly in on Jacob deGrom as well, and we'll see how that ends up working out because these two teams, the Rangers and the Braves, were the other two teams listed as contenders for deGrom outside of the New York Mets. But they still have to worry about Dansby Swanson, their own free agent. That's why I think they wanted to at least free up a little bit of money. And by sending out $10 million, that's a lot of money to send out, by the way. They save about $2.5 million against their salary figures anyway. Now, by bringing in Colby Allard, he's kind of a home run, gives up a lot of home runs, the long ball. That's why the Rangers basically gave up on him at the end of last year. He was mop-up duty at best anyway. But we'll see what ends up happening for him in Atlanta. But he goes back to a team that knows him very well. Maybe they end up DFAing him and try to save even more money and maybe get him on the AAA roster and try to get him as a depth starter the rest of the season. Appreciate you for subscribing, Robin. Thank you very much. But that's kind of where things stand with the Atlanta Braves. They're trying to save money as they go towards the free agency with the hole at shortstop with Dansby Swanson. If they do end up losing Dansby Swanson, they could go out or could try to pivot to one of the other top free agent shortstops that are out there. Correa, Turner, Bogarts, etc. Do I expect that to happen? No, I think they would rather just keep him in-house. But thank you guys for joining us. The other move, of course, that we mentioned earlier was the Edwin Diaz move, 5 years, $102 million. The Mets last offseason moved very quickly, and that's exactly what they've done this season. Edwin Diaz, by far the top closer on the market this year, struck out over 50% of batters. Absolutely an unheard of rate in Major League Baseball history, not just in recent history, but the entire game. Nobody has been quite as dominant as Edwin Diaz was this past season. Just the presence he has pitching in New York, absolutely must-have player for the New York Mets, and that's why they got the deal done. I was expecting a six-figure deal. A 9-figure deal anyway for Edwin Diaz, something over the $20 million range and a 5-year deal, and that's exactly what he got from the New York Mets. I'm surprised he didn't hold out a little bit more just to see if he could get it to a 6th-year deal if he were to allow other teams to get involved, but he's just a match made in heaven for the Mets, and that's exactly what he's going to be there for them. The other thing for the Mets is Jacob deGrom is also a free agent now that he's opted out of his deal. Appreciate you for subscribing to us. Is it Coastal? I think that's what it said, or Lost AJs. Okay, thank you for subscribing to us, Lost AJs. There we go. But as far as the move for the Mets anyway, they made the move for Diaz. They have the loss of deGrom in their starting staff. They have the loss of Chris Bassett as well. They could lose Carlos Carrasco if he opts out, if the team opts. I'm not sure which option he has, but they have some holes in their starting staff. Now, as far as center field, they also have Brendan Nimmo, who's going to be a free agent. The Mets are going to move quickly this free agency season. We've seen multiple articles already come out that they're already behind in negotiations. Welcome back, Declan. They're already behind in negotiations for Jacob deGrom. It sounds like they're starting to view themselves as a second-place team in this race. Little bit surprising when you see the open checkbook that Steve Cohen has, but maybe the other teams in the bidding, the Texas Rangers, are going to absolutely blow them out of the water. We saw Max Scherzer's deal, 3 years, $133 million or $130 million last year for $43 million in average annual value. I'm expecting a very similar type of deal for Jacob deGrom, even with the injury issues. I've seen multiple articles out there just saying that he's missed multiple games the last last 2 or 3 years. Everybody, let's cool it on the injury issues. I get it. He had the Tommy John issue and was out for a year. He did not miss the COVID year because COVID, you only had 12, 13 starts, and everybody's acting like 12, 13 starts in the COVID year was a bad thing. I'm sorry, no, that's what the season had. But we saw that he missed much of the season the past couple of years anyway because of that Tommy John. That's the one injury that he's had. Outside of that, he's been absolutely dominant, and that's why teams are very comfortable after seeing how good he performed at the second half of this past year, and especially in the postseason when they just saw Max Scherzer get blown up in Game 1. Jacob deGrom came out and shut things down in Game 2 and gave the Mets a chance to win that wild card round, even though they just had no juice offensively. Now, the Mets, of course, are going to go out and try to make some moves offensively, but looking at Jacob deGrom, they're going to try to make a move on him quickly, and if they don't get him to sign a contract early, I expect them to pivot immediately to another starting pitcher. They've already been in talks, apparently, with this camp, and it sounds like the talks are progressing quite quickly as far as the other teams and the Mets, but I'm still not seeing any progress from the Mets side as far as getting something really nailed down. Get to you in just a second, the 2 comments. Just want to finish up the Mets story here. But the Mets, of course, I already talked about Chris Bassett and Carlos Carrasco. Their center fielder, Brendan Nimmo, is by far the top center field target on the market. I imagine the Mets immediately moved from deGrom to Nimmo to try to lock him up, and if they can, Chris Bassett. But this market is moving very quickly. We've seen a lot of teams already try to make some moves, and we've already seen a lot of rumors come out. Most notably, the Trey Turner rumor that I talked to you guys about probably around in July when I told you Trey Turner was looking to move back east. I told you guys in September that he was still looking to move back east, possibly even on the radar of the Philadelphia Phillies, and now we're seeing that he actually has interest in the Philadelphia Phillies. So kind of connect those dots. It's been a long rumored thing. It sounds like Trey Turner could be headed to Philadelphia. That offense is going to be that much better with a guy like Trey Turner. I think he is probably the top free agent outside of Aaron Judge this offseason just because of the power potential he has to stay effective as he starts to lose a step as he ages in his contract. What could it end up looking like? A $35 million average annual value, maybe over 6-7 years to Philadelphia. Seems about right now, but that's kind of where things stand. But let's quickly get to the comments. If you guys want to join us in the comments, feel free to send us a message. Derpy, you messaged us before we even started. Really appreciate you joining us. What do you think Cleveland will do this offseason? Well, it's been rumored that they're going to sell off pieces in that rotation for about 2 or 3 years now. Every now and again, every 2 or 3 years is about when they spin off one of their starters to another team just to try to replenish their farm system, and that seems like the route that they're going to go down. They're never going to be a team that spends at the top end of the market for anybody. They had a really good rookie this year in Quan. Their starting staff still looks impeccable. If I'm a team on the outside looking at that rotation saying, hey, I want X player right now off of your roster to try to improve my team, and I'll give you X, Y, and Z prospects back, the guy I want right now off of that Cleveland roster is Tristan McKenzie. He was absolutely dominant. He's a cheap contract as well. However, I don't think that's going to happen. The more likely thing for Cleveland is they're going to spin off one of their older starting pitchers with a year or two left to control. Bieber is probably the most likely, but that's kind of where I see things at, Mr. Derpy. Declan, in my opinion, if Phillies get one of the top 7 starting pitchers on the market, we have a top 5, maybe top 3 rotation. Well, you already have a great 1-2. You have Zach Wheeler. You have Aaron Nola. If you get somebody like, let's just throw a name out there. Let's say you get Carlos Rodon. Carlos Rodon, in my opinion, is probably the second best pitcher on the market. I'm expecting a good contract for him in the neighborhood of 4 years. $128 million is what I've seen a lot of rumors out there for him. I think he may even get a 5th year because of how dominant he has been the last couple of years. Everybody was worried about his longevity as far as his effectiveness as the season wears on with the Chicago White Sox. That's why he took a 2-year deal, 1 year with an option anyway with the Giants, and opted out after the season. 2.84 earned run average for Rodon. If you get a player like Rodon, I think you're easily going to be the favorite in the NL East. And that's even with a very good team in the Atlanta Braves, with young starting pitching, locked up position players as well. I think you have a little bit better roster, higher quality pieces as well. And say you get Trey Turner on top of that, that's the cherry on top. For the Mets, they just have too many questions as far as that starting staff is concerned, and their offense sputtered down the stretch. I'm wondering if they're going to be able to, one, keep their starters, or at least rebound that rotation back to a respectable level rotation, as high as a level possibly as this year. No, but maybe a respectable one, yes. But they still need to improve offensively. Third base is one spot I could see some movement. Designated hitter, maybe a corner outfielder, something like that. Mark Canha signed a long-term deal. Marte signed a long-term deal. But they do need some type of a bat, and especially if they lose Nimmo in free agency, that sets them back quite a bit because there's really nobody out there on the market right now that can fill those shoes of Brennan Nimmo. That's why I say if DeGrom chooses that he wants to opt for one of these other teams out there and try to listen to those offers and go to the winter meetings, I think the Mets are saying, see ya, we don't have time to wait for you to try to agree to our deal. So even though we still have a chance at you, I think we're going to move on to our next target in Brennan Nimmo and try to lock him up. Do I think they're going to close the door on DeGrom if he ultimately wants back? No, but I think they're going to stop holding up their offseason if DeGrom wants to really test the market, which I think he will, and I think there's going to be teams out there more than willing to pay the price to be able to get him on the roster, the Texas Rangers. I am a Rangers fan, just to kind of clarify, but there is so many rumblings right now between DeGrom and Texas, it's not even funny. Even the New York reporters, which rarely say that they're going to lose free agents to other teams as far as the Mets or Yankees players, they're saying they're very likely to lose DeGrom at this point. Now, things could change. John Heyman and Joel Sherman both noticing that the market for DeGrom is very strong outside of New York, between Atlanta and Texas. After the move for Odorizzi, though, and they're eating $10 million, I wonder if Atlanta's priorities are now focused solely on the shortstop position, considering how much they've invested in their other position players. They need to have that spot filled up by a great player. They already have great starting pitching options. DeGrom would be kind of a luxury item for them, if you will, in the starting staff. And I don't really see that as being as much of a priority as shortstop. That's why I think Texas is by far the front runner for Jacob DeGrom outside of the Mets if he ultimately decides to leave. But just to kind of answer your question, where do you think the Mets would be? If you get a guy that's at the top of the top end of the rotation, I think you're absolutely great. If you get another middling type of starter, like Taijuan Walker has been over the last few years, like Kyle Gibson has been over the last few years, then I think you're talking more of the same. Noah Syndergaard level free agent, I think you're talking more of the same level of free agency. If you're talking as far as like a Verlander, I don't think you're going to get Verlander. I think he ultimately ends up back in Houston. I don't think there's really any reason for him to leave Houston. I think he's very comfortable there. And I think Houston more than really wants to keep him in-house as well as kind of their veteran on that roster, who really are veteran on their staff, if you will, that can kind of hold things down. I wonder if they're going to worry about Lance McCullers long-term because of the injury issues that he had. And, of course, getting blown up in the World Series in Game 2. And as far as Kershaw, there's no chance Kershaw is going to Philadelphia. Just go ahead and get rid of that pipe dream. Rather Turner than Nimmo to the Mets. You already have a good shortstop in Lindor. Turner, as a Rangers fan, I talked about this probably in, I don't know, May, as far as Turner being a great free agent, either bringing him in as a third baseman or a left fielder. So I could see you moving around Turner as a possibility. You could move Lindor if you had to, but I think Turner would be the guy that ends up moving. Turner has played center field in the minor leagues, so maybe if you lose Nimmo, you spend the money on Turner and put him in center, but that's a lot of money for a center fielder, and that's going to wear Turner down quite a bit through the rest of that contract. I don't think that would be quite as wise of an investment. I'd rather spend the money on Nimmo and still try to add another piece, but maybe not necessarily at the Turner level. For those of you wondering, we're going to have some content coming out for you guys as far as free agents that are on the market right now. One that nobody is talking about is Mitch Haniger. It sounds like the Mariners are not going to offer him a qualifying offer. Absolute mistake in my opinion. I think this player is absolutely bananas as far as statistics. He's great in the clubhouse, absolutely gamer on the field anyway, great hitter, and he posts for you every single day. Now, of course, people will point to the injury issue that he had this past season, but I will say that was one injury that he had. It wasn't like a collective injury history that he's had over the last 3 or 4 years, and I still have a lot of confidence in the level of player that Mitch Haniger has, the ability that he has anyway, and I could see him being possibly the #1 outfielder outside of Aaron Judge on the market right now. Brandon Nimmo in a different category anyway, because he's the only center fielder. DeGrom and Turner, I hope the Mets sign plus redo the bullpen. Well, you're going to have to bring in some bullpen arms if you're a Mets fan. You already have brought back Edwin Diaz, but Adam Ottavino's a free agent. You've retooled that bullpen as well during the season at the trade deadline, but that still wasn't enough. You still had to use Diaz in interesting spots we saw in that wild card round that just didn't work out for the Mets. But they do need to beef up that bullpen. There's a lot of bullpen arms out there, a lot of 6th, 7th, 8th inning guys out there. So the Mets should easily be able to retool that bullpen. So don't have any worries about that if you're a Mets fan. Only worry if you see them not sign anybody by the time February comes around and they're just trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel. Sure, they might get 1 or 2 guys, but they're still not going to have a top end pen if they go about it that route. Any opinions on the Cubs shortstop hole? I mean, they are going to go after someone, but who? That's a good question. The Cubs obviously shed a lot of money over the last couple of years trying to get that payroll down, and then interesting, spent a little bit of money last year bringing in Suzuki, who at the time I thought was going to be an MVP level of player when he came in. He still was a very good player, but I think he's more of an all-star though at this point. Starting staff, they brought in Marcus Stroman, but as far as a shortstop, I still see them kind of holding back a little bit financially. I think there's other teams that are going to be willing to outbid them for a star shortstop. If you had to pick one of the top 4, I don't think Correa is going to go there because I think he wants to be in a surefire postseason level performance type of position. So I think you scratch him off. Swanson, I think, is looking for absolutely the top dollar on the market right now. So if you're willing to go that high, maybe you go for a guy like Dansby Swanson, but he's by no means the best shortstop on the market. That, to me, is still Trey Turner. Xander Bogaerts also is up there as well. Probably the most consistent offensive player. Not as good defensively, but he's still very productive on both sides of the ball anyway. But for me, the top of the heap is still Trey Turner. Now, as far as the Cubs situation, do I see them getting any of them? Most likely, if I'm looking for a shortstop, if I'm the Cubs, I think the most realistic option would be Xander Bogaerts. And that's solely because I believe the Red Sox are more than willing to see him go if the bidding gets too high, because they already brought in Trevor Story last offseason on a 6-year, $140 million deal towards the end of free agency. He didn't have a great year, but maybe that's because he was kind of shifted out of position. Maybe if they get him back into shortstop, he feels more comfortable, has a better year, another year in Boston, etc., etc. At least that's the thought process if you're a Red Sox fan. There's already rumors coming out of Boston that they pivoted to second base backup options if they lose Xander Bogaerts in free agency. That tells me we've already lost Xander Bogaerts in free agency. That's not just me saying it. That's last offseason when the Boston Red Sox had the opportunity to put a legitimate offer in front of Xander Bogaerts and put such a low offer in front of him, they offended him to the point where he wasn't willing to come to the table and negotiate during the season. He reiterated that over and over. So Xander Bogaerts, I do not think is going back to Boston. If you guys have a question or wondering about the latest rumors, send us the comment. Appreciate you guys who have subscribed. Already gained a couple of you guys so far this evening. But there's a lot of news to get to, so let's kind of get through a couple of the other notes. First and foremost, Aaron Judge he is absolutely the top free agent on the market right now, and there's a number of teams interested, but I think there's only 3 or 4 realistic opportunities that Aaron Judge could really sign up for. First, the New York Yankees, the team he's already played with. I think they really have the best chance of signing Aaron Judge just because I think there's not really a good option on the market if they lose Aaron Judge in free agency. Say he goes to the Dodgers in free agency for whatever the contract is. What's the answer for the loss of Aaron Judge in the lineup if you're a Yankees fan? If you're Brian Cashman, you lose Aaron Judge. You bring in Mitch Haniger? Absolutely not. That's not even close to the same level of players. So that's why I think the Yankees are by far going to have the the best offer on the table. They did only offer him $212 million over 6 years, just before the start of free agency just before the start of the season this past year when they had to go into arbitration. Obviously, more of a slap in the face offer to Aaron Judge. He wants that long-term, big money deal, and he's going to get it this offseason. There's high payroll teams interested in him. The LA Dodgers, I already mentioned them. They're looking at both Carlos Correa and Aaron Judge this offseason. Looking at the San Francisco Giants, they are going to spend money this offseason. There's been rumors about where they're going to spend it. If I had to put money on it, I would say either 1, the outfield is probably the most likely, and 2, as far as a shortstop. The shortstop market is not just the free agent shortstops out there. There's a lot of trade possibilities out there as well. Tim Anderson is just had his option picked up anyway by the White Sox. Not saying that he's likely to be traded, but I think players in their final year of a deal, if they're not able to negotiate a long-term deal, if you offer them the right pieces, maybe you could convince the White Sox to say, hey, might be worth it to give up 1 year of Tim Anderson to really get your payroll back underway anyway, and be able to get in some top-level prospects as well. Not saying Tim Anderson's the guy. The guy I would look at is Fernando Tatis Jr. from the San Diego Padres. That front office is fed up with his nonsense. We saw it last offseason anyway when he got in multiple motorcycle accidents, never reported it to the team, never sought treatment for it, showed up to spring training and said, hey, by the way, I'm injured. Now I have to miss 3 months. The organization was already upset about that, but they're like, hey, you're injured. We get it. Don't do it again. Grow up. Then, as they are just about to get him back on the field, they make the big trade for Juan Soto. They invest all of this money in their starting staff, acquiring Yu Darvish. They brought in Blake Snell over the past couple of years, Mike Clevenger. They've got a great rotation. They're ready to go. They make the trade for Josh Hader to beef up that bullpen. They bring in Brandon Drury, second base, utility type player. They bring in Josh Bell. They get rid of Eric Hosmer. They made a lot of moves to make this roster just right this past season, and Fernando Tatis Jr. was due back right after the trade deadline. Just before he's getting back, he's put in minor league baseball to try to get amped up, or try to get revved up anyway for rehab assignments, etc. They were playing him in center just to try to see his versatility because Kim was playing well at shortstop, but that's how they were using him. And then the news broke that he was going to be suspended for 80 games due to PEDs. Horrible blow to the San Diego Padres. That's why the organization said the comments they did at the time. You can go back and look at all those videos I made for you guys about the Padres, about how angry Preller, the front office, was anyway for the Padres. It doesn't go away just because the player isn't around the team. I mean, there's a hole that you see every single day on your roster that your number 3, 4 hitter anyway isn't there just when you bring in a guy like Manny Machado over the past couple of years. And now you got Juan Soto, and now you're supposed to have a 2-3-4 of Soto, Machado, and Tatis, and one guy isn't there because he made a mistake. I'm sorry, that's inexcusable anyway. And that's why I think if you're a team that's looking for a shortstop, don't just look at the free agents. Look out there for some of the shortstops that are out there on the market. I think if you made a really competitive offer, heavy prospect laden, and some major league level talent in return, I think the Padres would be willing to listen. I think they're willing to hand over the reins of that organization as far as on the field to Manny Machado and Juan Soto, and just see how that level of responsibility goes. Now, of course, they're looking to sign Juan Soto to a long-term deal this offseason. I expect that to get done sometime around the winter meetings. As far as how much could we be expecting, I'm expecting well north of $400 million. Padres fans, you're going to pay through the nose to be able to see him. That's all I'm going to say. But you're going to have a very good roster going forward. Looks like they're willing to spend money in San Diego. But there's a lot of moves, as I was mentioning, to kind of go over in this offseason. But just kind of check in on a couple of free agents out there. The catching market is already kind of getting underway. Wilson Contreras is expected to be getting a qualifying offer, and I expect him to decline that. Seems like there's a lot of teams in on Wilson Contreras, but we'll see where he ends up going. He's by far the most offensive catcher on the market right now, so kind of keep your eyes peeled for where he ends up going. The Mets at the trade deadline were interested in him, but the Cubs had zero interest in what they were offering, so maybe the Mets, in order to try to improve their offense, make a move at catcher. He will lose a draft pick, etc., as far as compensation because of that qualifying offer. But there's also some trade targets out there that they could look to. But Wilson Contreras is the top free agent catcher on the market. If I'm earmarking a player to go to a team, I would probably say the Mets or the Cubs for Wilson Contreras. First base, there's not a lot of depth there. There's only a couple of players of high-profile value for you guys out there. Jose Abreu and Josh Bell are probably the top two pieces. Trey Mancini is going to be a free agent. We already heard Eric Hosmer is going to opt into his deal with the Red Sox. So he basically is a free player for the Red Sox for the next few years because the Padres paid every single dime of his contract just for the Red Sox to take him off their hands. But Will Myers will also be a free agent, but not necessarily on the level of a guy like Josh Bell or Jose Abreu. Abreu I still expect back with the White Sox. I think he might be a DH type of option for them. But teams with a hole at first base, like the Houston Astros, could be an option for Jose Abreu as well. That could be an option. By the way, the league announced the first game of the season anyway. It will be the White Sox versus the Astros. Maybe the league knows something that we don't. Maybe the league is knowing that the White Sox are going to turn over first base to Andrew Vaughn. They're going to turn over Eloy Jimenez over to their DH spot and just try to go with a more athletic outfield. And maybe they know that Houston is the team that's going to be a suitor for Jose Abreu. Maybe that's what ends up happening. But they were also, at the trade deadline, linked with Josh Bell. He's going to be a highly sought-after free agent as well. Anthony Rizzo, the other first baseman on the market, I don't think he's on the level of those two players offensively anymore. I still think he's a very good leader, very good defensively. And in that case, I would say he's up to their, because of those two abilities, he comes up to that type of a level. But offensively, he's not quite that player anymore. But I think the New York Yankees still would really like to have him back. It sounds like they're going to offer him a qualifying offer. If I'm Rizzo, I may be tempted to take it because it would be a raise off of what you were expected to make this season anyway. That's why he opted out of his deal. If he chooses to decline his option and decline the qualifying offer, then we'll know if he really wants a long-term deal. Then other teams could get in the mix. I expect that AAV to be a little bit lower if that happens. But the New York Yankees, I think, are still the front runner in those sweepstakes. Second baseman, as I mentioned, the Red Sox are pivoting to second base already. If I had to put money on it, the best player at the position right now for free agents, probably going to be Gene Segura. He had his option declined by the Philadelphia Phillies. Now, he's not a superstar level player. Adam Frazier is not a superstar level player as well. But those are some nice fill-in options if the Red Sox were to lose a guy like that in free agency. Now, of course, we already mentioned the shortstop class. The top four on the market: Trey Turner, 1, in my opinion; Carlos Correa, 2; 3, Xander Bogaerts; and 4, Dansby Swanson. Swanson, I think, is going to go for the biggest dollar amount as far as whatever he can get from whatever team. I don't think he's going to show the Braves as much loyalty as other players have in the past anyway for the Braves. I think he wants that bag, and so whoever ends up offering him the most, I think he'll go there. Xander Bogaerts, I think it's a very similar situation, but I think he still wants to be on a team that's at least pushing for playoff contention, maybe not World Series contention. That's why I think the Phillies would be a great fit for him, but I still think they would prefer to have Trey Turner, if they're speaking honestly, just because of the type of player he is. Brings a little bit more speed to the game than Bogaerts does, has a little bit more pop in his bat as well. However, Bogaerts is a little bit more consistent from year to year offensively. But still should be a very good contest to see which player ends up getting the better deal. The one wild card in this is, of course, Carlos Correa. He took the 3-year, $105 million contract from the Twins last year with an opt-out after the first and second year. That's why he's a free agent again this year, because he opted to be a free agent. At the time of the deal, that was a great thing for the Minnesota Twins. We thought, hey, they're going to make the postseason. Second half of the season, though, their pitching basically fell apart. They had no other offense in that lineup to really be able to support that pitching staff that was giving up runs by the bushel. And then, of course, the Byron Buxton again fell down due to injury. Buxton, of course, one of the top players in the league, but when he's not on the field, he can't be one of the top players in the league. That's why Carlos Correa was one man by himself as the season kind of dragged along, and they just fell really fast out of playoff contention. I don't think he goes back to Minnesota. Sorry, Twins fans. Speaking as a Twins fan myself, really great to see a team like that be able to get one of the top free agent players out there on the market. Twins have never really played in that type of a market, so it was really nice to see them be able to get a player like that. This might be their only opportunity to ever be able to do that type of thing ever again, just because Carlos Correa didn't have a great experience there. I mean, he might have enjoyed the team, might have enjoyed the city, but we saw they didn't make the playoffs, and that's all Carlos Correa is about right now. He wants to be in the postseason, and it sounds like the Dodgers are most likely to go after him if they lose Trey Turner, which I think is very likely at this point. Dansby Swanson, as I mentioned, top dollar is where I expect him to end up going. That's why I think they're trying to free up every dollar that they can in Atlanta, giving out $10 million to the Texas Rangers in the deal to send Jake Odorizzi to Texas in exchange for Colby Allard. That's a lot of money to give up. I mean, Texas probably insisted on that. I understand that. But Texas Rangers just picked up a fifth starter for $2.5 million. That's what they could have signed him for. And Jake Odorizzi has the stuff to be a number 2 in a rotation when he's on. But obviously he wasn't on after being sent to Atlanta. He started out the season with the Houston Astros. The Rangers always have had an affinity for former Tampa Bay Rays starting pitchers. Odorizzi fits that characteristic as well, and so he should be a nice fit for the Texas Rangers. And they still have all of this money that they're now saving on their number 5 starter that they can now invest in a top of the rotation level starter, which is what they will do. But the Dansby Swanson angle to the Atlanta Braves, they free up a little bit of money. I mean a little. To be able to bring in the shortstop of Dansby Swanson's caliber and try to negotiate that type of a deal. But there are a number of teams out there that do need shortstops that could throw significant money at him. The Giants are expected to throw big money around this offseason, and Dansby Swanson could be had for the highest bid. Maybe that's another team for him as well. Third baseman, anyway. We're still waiting on the Justin Turner decision. I haven't seen a headline about that one, whether or not the club is going to accept that deal or not. He was the Roberto Clemente Award winner this past year. Great person on and off the field, but his bat certainly has regressed over the past few years. And for a $16 million contract, to me, if I'm a Dodger, I want that contract declined and I want that money invested elsewhere. That's what I would like to see happen, but I don't think it will. I think he probably will end up have that option picked up because I don't think they want to go the route of trying to find another third baseman and a shortstop at this point. Welcome in, Cobra. You think Rizzo goes to the Padres? Would make sense. They need a first baseman. You think all three, Rizzo, Rodon, and Jock? I could see Jock, Rodon. I just don't see that happening. They invested already quite a bit in their starting staff. If they're going to bring in a starting pitcher, I think they probably bring back one of their own guys, like a Sean Manaea, something like that. But for me, I believe it's going to probably end up going. They're going to go a little bit cheaper than Rodon. Appreciate you guys joining us. Moving on to left field. As I mentioned, as far as outfielders go, there's not a lot of great options out there outside of the top few guys. We already saw Jurickson Profar decline his player option. In a little bit of a surprise, A.J. Pollock declined his option. But when you look at his deal, he had a $5 million buyout. He's already guaranteed that $5 million. I believe A.J. Pollock is still about an $8 million player, maybe a one-win player. And so I think in the right spot, maybe a spot with a DH that could use a good contact hitter with a little bit of pop, maybe A.J. Pollock finds a little bit more of that bat as he's given more of those DH possibilities on another team. But maybe an NL team who hasn't had much experience with a designated hitter gives Pollock a 1 or a 2 year deal at $16 million total. That type of a deal would make the opt-out for Pollock worth it. We already saw the mutual option, I believe, for Pham get picked up, if I remember correctly. Jock Peterson, we just had somebody mention him. Welcome in, Jose. Appreciate you joining us. I would love Correa in a Phillies uniform. Well, I think Philadelphia is going to look strongly at that shortstop position. 2 months ago, I told you guys that Bogarts was their number one priority at that time, but 1A to that was Trey Turner. It seems like Trey Turner ultimately wants to go to Philadelphia. There's multiple articles coming out today that that's exactly where he wants to go. He wants to go back east. He wants to go back to the NL East, and it seems like Philadelphia is his number one choice. I would prefer to have Trey Turner over Carlos Correa, but for each his own anyway. There's a lot of people out there who thought Corey Seager was a better player over Correa. A lot of people thought Correa was a better player over Seager last offseason. We'll see if that happens. But thank you for joining us, Jose. Overrated or underrated Eovaldi? I think I just saw you post anyway a minute ago. Improperly rated both ways. I think there's too many people who guess at what his abilities are. The injury issues are a real thing. The use on that arm back in the World Series run that the Red Sox had a few years ago, also another big issue for him. I wonder if a team is going to give him a long-term deal because of those issues. So I think they might give him a high AAV or an incentive-laden deal out there for him. But we could see something like that happen. But to just kind of wrap up the left fielders, Andrew Benintendi is probably the top option. I saw one projection out there, 6 years at $106 million for Andrew Benintendi. I don't think it gets that high. I think we're probably talking more in the 5-year, 85, 5-year, $90 million range. I don't think he gets into that 9-figure deal anyway. But I could be wrong. But for my money, Andrew Benintendi is an all-bat type of a player, not a great defender. And it does go through slumps. This past season was the first time he's really kind of kicked things off, but we'll end up seeing what happens for him. Overrated or underrated? Eovaldi, Trey Mancini, or Nimmo? I think Nimmo is very underrated. The Mets are going to miss him if they lose him. In my opinion, I think he's kind of the engine of that team offensively outside of Alonso and Lindor because he gets on base a little bit more frequently in front of those big bats, allowing those solo home runs to be 2- and 3-run home runs. But that's kind of what I would like to see for the Mets is to be able to hold on to a guy like Nimmo. So very underrated. Trey Mancini, a little bit overrated just because I think everybody recognizes the name at this point. While he's still a good player offensively, we saw his limitations defensively in the World Series. Not exactly a great rangy defender anymore. Seems destined to more of a DH role. And even at that point, he's still not going to hit for 300, not going to hit over 30 home runs. So I think he's a little bit overrated. And I already talked to you about Nathan Eovaldi. My Padres need an outfielder, first base, and a starter. I think you're just going to need a depth starter. First base, you do need to bring in somebody back, maybe a guy like Josh Bell. But that experiment didn't go well this second half of the season with Bell. So maybe they pivot to someone else. Outfielder, I think they're going to have to go after Jerks and Profar again. They like that flexible type of a player, but Profar's going to have a big market out there. Teams like to have that versatility, and Profar played very well for them. He was one of their few outfielders that actually had any success last offseason. Center fielders, I already mentioned in previous videos that Aaron Judge can play center field, but he's not going to be in center field very long, if at all, on any team that he goes to. Mentioned a couple of the teams earlier that were in on his market, the Yankees and Dodgers. However, the Giants are expected to be very much interested in his sweepstakes. Probably going to get well over $40 million in average annual value, I believe, for Aaron Judge. That's why I think that contract could go north of $400 million for Aaron Judge. It's going to be a lot of money. The Giants have a lot of money to give out. They have a lot of contracts that are now off of their books. They have money to spend, and they're going to do it. They have a good starting staff already. They could supplement it with another starter, in my opinion, but they need to improve that offense. They need to get younger, and bringing in a guy like Aaron Judge would be a great get for them. He is 31. But he still should be a fantastic player as he ages. Maybe years 6, 7, and 8 might start to look a little bit bad, and then 9 and 10 just look awful. But Aaron Judge is still the top free agent target out there by a mile. Adam Duvall, I mentioned him in a previous video, but not very much. Adam Duvall's had a good career. Has found a little bit more of that bat this past few years, but he's had some injury issues, so he's not going to get a big deal. So if you're looking for some better at bats out of your outfielder spot, the Texas Rangers, if they go big at the starting pitcher, maybe they improve their left field spot with Adam Duvall to kind of improve their offense in left on a little bit more of a cheaper deal. But in center, it's all about Brandon Nimmo. He's the best center fielder by a mile. Is he going to be able to get a 5-year deal? I believe so in this market. Maybe even a 6-year deal for a guy like Brandon Nimmo, just because the dearth of talent at center field is just very apparent. I mean, the next best options are going to be, Kevin Kiermaier and Pilar. I mean, just not a great market out there. I wouldn't be mad if the Phillies got Turner, but my Phillies definitely need to get one of these shortstops. Preferred choice is Correa. We need a pitching. You do need another pitcher, but I don't think you're going to spend at the top of the market for a starting pitcher. If I had to, speculate on what level of starter, probably more in the grab bag of like a Taijuan Walker or a middling type of starter, Noah Syndergaard, pieces like that. Right fielders, one name that hasn't been mentioned at all so far this offseason is Joey Gallo. I understand he was absolutely terrible last year. He's had a rough go of it as far as contact over the last couple of years. He struck out a lot. I think he's tried to tweak his swing a little bit too much with every single bat that he's had. He just needs to go somewhere where he can get regular playing time. He wasn't getting that in New York, and he wasn't getting that in L.A. When he had regular playing time with the Rangers, no problem, even with the issues of the shift. Now, understandably, he only hit like 212 on a good day, but that 212 anyway, with on-base percentage, much like Kyle Schwarber's anyway, with the walk rate, power numbers were through the roof as well, obviously. But if he can get to that level of player again, all of those hits that were being gobbled up because of the shift now fall in. So if he can get back to the player that he was just a year and a half ago with the Rangers, we're talking about a player that now hits, 270, 280 anyway, because the shift is no longer there, and just how hard he hits it through the infield anyway. There's not a lot of infielders that are going to be able to range right or left quick enough to be able to stop that ball getting through to the outfield, and that's why I see Joey Gallo being a nice piece for a team out there that's looking for a low-cost option. So those rebuilding teams that are out there, keep your eyes peeled for Joey Gallo. You might have yourself a star on your hands if you can get him to stop striking out as much. But, of course, the name of the game is still Aaron Judge in right field, by far the best free agent. We've already mentioned him. I talked a little bit about Mitch Haniger. He's probably the best outfielder in my mind outside of him and Nimmo. Nimmo's in a separate category because of that center field class. But Haniger, for my money in right field, that's the guy I want to go after if you're looking for an offensive improvement. Will Myers, of course, has kind of danced all around the diamond over the past couple of years. Left, center, right, first base, etc. But maybe he could add some depth anyway to a team that's already got 3 outfielders out there. Not a lot of starters that are on the outfield market this year. Designated hitters, a lot of guys had some decent success this year. Jose Abreu, Matt Carpenter had a very good bounce-back year for the Yankees. Anyway, J.D. Martinez is finally a free agent after having great success with the Red Sox. I thought he would be moved at the deadline to the Mets, so maybe the Mets improve their designated hitter spot and their offense by actually bringing him in now. They did go with more of a platoon with Ruff and Vogelbach. I think they need to improve that position overall and bring in a guy like Martinez to kind of solidify that spot for them, however. Starting pitching, we've talked a little bit about the qualifying offers, but they're still trying to work some of those details out. Sounds like Tyler Anderson of the Dodgers anyway could get a qualifying offer just because of how well he performed. Mike Clevenger, of course, the Padres gave up a lot of money for him, a lot of prospects anyway, to bring him in at the time from the Cleveland Guardians. But I'm not sure if he'll end up getting a qualifying offer. I haven't seen any articles as to whether or not he had or had not. DeGrom obviously will get a qualifying offer. As I mentioned, the teams in on him: Texas Rangers, Atlanta Braves, and the New York Mets. We touched in the beginning of this video on how the New York Mets are looking to make a big offer to DeGrom early just to gauge his interest. And if he takes the offer, great. If he doesn't, and if he wants to dawdle around and go to the winter meetings and just test out other ballparks, get a feel for the city, those kinds of things, Mets are moving on. They're not going to sit around and wait for their offseason. Last offseason, we saw them move quickly on Mark Canha, Starling Marte, Chris Bassett, etc. But that's kind of what the Mets are going to end up doing for that starting staff. Other starters that I mentioned, Chris Bassett from the Mets is going to get a nice payday out there. I think the Mets are probably the most likely, just because if they lose DeGrom to a team like Texas, which even the New York media thinks is very likely at this point, they need to bring back a guy like Chris Bassett. Cobra, I mentioned a little bit earlier, there's a misnomer out there that Jacob DeGrom is injury prone. The only injury he's had is one Tommy John. He came back last year and was absolutely lights out. Max Scherzer is the one I'm worried about long term out of the two, just because we saw him kind of have that dead arm in last season's playoffs. This year, just before his game one start, looked a little funny in the bullpen, then got rocked for 7 earned runs. Just seems like he gets kind of worn out as the season goes on now. That's 2 years in a row Max Scherzer has failed in the postseason. Remember 2 years ago, he gave up the ball in Game 6 and said, hey, I can't go. You have to let Walker Buehler go. That's how the Atlanta Braves won Game 6 and took the advantage of the Dodgers and went on to the World Series and took the title. And then this year, of course, he gave up those 7 runs to the Padres. That's pretty much how the series went. Game 2, DeGrom came in and was absolutely dominant and gave them a chance, but the series was basically over at that point. The offense for the Mets just wasn't able to come through pretty much the entire month of September and into the postseason. But as far as to your injury note, as far as on DeGrom, everybody's mentioning how he only had 12 starts in 2020 in the 2020 season. That was the COVID year. The best starter in the league, anyway, only had 13 starts. That was only 12 for DeGrom that year. That was the COVID-shortened year. That's why that is not something I'm considering as far as being injury-prone. One injury does not equal injury-prone, in my opinion. Now, of course, Tommy John does worry you, but I still would rather put my money on a guy like Jacob DeGrom at this point than a guy like Max Scherzer. Other starters that could be out there, the Mets could save a little bit of money and really go after Jacob DeGrom in earnest anyway if they let go of Carlos Carrasco. However, he is on a $14 million club option with a $3 million buyout, so they'd save $11 million. They'd immediately have to they'd need another starter, of course, to fill the shoes of Carrasco. But if they get the money to bring in DeGrom, that of course would be the get for them. They might have to go with kind of the back end starter options at that point. Guys like Matthew Boyd, Johnny Cueto, those level of starters anyway. But kind of keep your eyes peeled for what ends up happening with the Mets starters. The other starter out there, of course, is Clayton Kershaw, the LA Dodgers. A lot of rumblings out there about whether or not he'll retire yet again, or will he go to the Texas Rangers, or will he stay in the LA Dodgers. A lot of the national media is basically poo-pooing the idea of him going to the Rangers. He does have serious interest in playing in Texas. The idea of any media reporters out there basically saying, not going to happen because he's played in LA all his life. He hasn't played in LA all his life. Just in his days with the Dodgers is the only time he's played in LA. He is a Texas boy. He lives in Texas. He lives in Arlington. He's very familiar with the front office, has a great relationship with Chris Young before he even became a member of the Texas Rangers organization. And that's kind of where things stand right now. And, of course, he's got a lot of Dodgers teammates, a lot of Dodgers connections with the Texas Rangers right now. Corey Seager was signed from the Dodgers this past offseason, another LA connection, so he would be very comfortable with the teammates that he has around him. And they're going to spend money on the starting staff. I don't think if they get Kershaw that they're done. I think they're still going to play at the top end of the starting pitcher market. I think they're going to bring back Martin Perez. They already brought in Jake Odorizzi. This starting staff is looking much better, and they have a ton of young prospects that look to finally be about ready this year. We'll see if they finally break through the majors, but for right now, Clayton Kershaw, I think it's a dead heat between the Rangers and Dodgers. I don't really think he's going to retire, but those are kind of the options for him on the board. But the idea of him not signing with the Texas Rangers just because of his career with the Dodgers doesn't make any sense to me. Get out of here with that. Specifically, Matt Vasgersian, I'm talking about you. Judge will be an interesting story. Yankees will throw in the money. I think Boston and the Mets will be the final two to acquire Judge services. That would be very interesting. I haven't heard the Boston Red Sox much on Aaron Judge anyway. I've heard the Mets just because they'd like to stick it to the Yankees. But they got a lot of money already that they've got to worry about this offseason. They got a hole in center. They got to worry about their starting staff. The Yankees, I still think, are going to be right there. I wonder how much of a salary they're willing to give him because, again, luxury tax, et cetera, is a concern for them. And teams like the Dodgers, they seem to be willing to blow through it. The Giants have all this free money now. We'll see if they end up making a move like that. Welcome in, Bounty Hunter. Appreciate you joining us. If you're just joining us for the first time, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. It really does help us out. Already gained about 5 or 6 subscribes during this video. Really appreciate you guys. We're going to be going through the MLB offseason with you guys pretty much every night and try to give you every single headline that we can, every rumor that we're hearing out there for you guys as well. That way you guys don't have to try to look it up on Twitter and try to chase down every story yourself. Just sign in here and we'll have it all for you in videos. And we'll do a whole bunch of short videos as well. That way, guys, if you just need to see a little snippet of it, we'll have it for you as well. But your question, Bounty Hunter, what do you think the Orioles will do? They could be a player for the first time for free agents since probably like 2017, 2016, when they first started going into the tank anyway. A little bit surprising. Do I expect them to play at the top of the market? Absolutely not. But they could go after some nice utility type of pieces anyway. Players like a guy like Jerks and Profar. They've had horrible production at shortstop. They do finally have their young shortstop about ready. They have the top pick in the draft. So they got some talent coming up, but a guy like Profar would be a good cover anyway for those younger players and then allow him to flex around wherever they need him to fill in. There's also talk that they could move Anthony Santander this offseason. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think they could make a move for an outfielder. Maybe they bring back a guy like Trey Mancini, more retreads anyway for them. They've done that a lot over the past few years. Rougned Odor, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to need some starting pitchers at some point. We'll see if they ultimately have those young guys come through and perform well, but you're going to need some innings eaters in that starting staff. Jordan Lyles declined his option. Maybe they go that route. Drew Smiley, cheap options to get them some innings out of that starting staff. The rebuild is over. I think you are building. That team looks so much better at the second half of the season. Adley Rutschman, absolute superstar for you guys. Congratulations. You finally have something since Machado to really hang your hat on as an organization. We had somebody also mention Justin Verlander as well is going to be a free agent. I think he ultimately ends up going back to Houston, though. I don't really think there's much debate about that one either. Noah Syndergaard, a nice piece out there as well. Carlos Rodon is probably the second best starter behind Jacob deGrom. I think he easily eclipses $120 million over 4 years. I think he's probably going to get in that 5-year range from a team because he's going to want that long-term flexibility or long-term stability anyway with an organization. Seeing as how that's the issue, that's why he didn't sign a long-term deal last year at a cheaper rate because he wanted to really cash in this offseason. So he will do so. Now, Carlos Rodon is only 30 years old. Martin Perez, another starting pitcher out there that I think will stay with the Texas Rangers, though. They're looking at giving him a qualifying offer if they're unable to come to a long-term agreement. We will have a video about that coming up here, I think tomorrow morning is when we have that one set to release. But are the Giants doing anything besides mentioning Judge? Well, they're looking at that shortstop market. I know Zaidi was just quoted as saying that Brandon Crawford is going to be your starting shortstop next year. But everything is subject to change during the offseason. I think Brandon Crawford is a very nice player, had a great career with the Giants. But if they get a chance at a guy like Turner, I'm sorry, move over Brandon Crawford, put Trey Turner at shortstop. But it sounds like they're going to be looking for some bats in that lineup if you're a Giants fan. Taijuan Walker, another name to keep an eye out on. Obviously, he had a $6 million player option with a $3 million buyout, so he only loses $3 million by opting out of the deal. So good choice for him to move on. But he had a nice year this past year with the Mets. I expect to see him get a long-term deal as well. But do I expect it to be on the level of a guy like Carlos Rodon? Absolutely not. But he should still do very well in free agency. On the reliever front, we already saw the top free agent go off the board in Edwin Diaz. There's not really a lot of great options beyond that if you're looking for a closer. I mean, you could say Kenley Jansen, but he's certainly stepped back over the past couple of years. Injury issues, the heart arrhythmia that he's had. There's a couple other players out there that have closing experience. Chad Green, Ken Giles, Jerry's Familia, Michael Fulmer, Carl Edwards Jr., Alex Colomb, Steve Shesak, etc. But nobody's really jumping off the page as being a difference maker type of player anyway at the closer spot. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of these guys are now eighth inning guys, and those would be great pieces to have, mix and match in your bullpen to try to see if you can improve and make yourself a little bit better. But they took the top option off the board already. I think that was a little bit of a discount that Diaz gave him just to kind of make sure he stays in New York, because I think he probably could have gotten a sixth year out of it as a reliever, unheard of as a reliever, but because of how dominant he was this past year and the market that's out there, I think he very well could have gotten a sixth year out of the Mets. Other relievers, Corey Knebel has had some good closing years in the past. Jose Leclerc had his option picked up anyway by the Texas Rangers. Rafael Montero had a great season with the Houston Astros. I expect him to either stay with Houston or go to Texas again. Seems like as long as he stays on one of the two Texas teams, he's fine. He goes anywhere else, he throws 5.5 ERA and gives up long balls all over the place. But as long as he stays in Texas, I think that he should be fine. I think that's pretty much it. There's a few other names for bullpen that a lot of people might be interested in. The best lefty reliever last year was Matt Moore. I don't think anybody knows that one unless you're a Rangers fan watching them. He was by far the best lefty out of the bullpen. Zach Britton is going to be a free agent out of the bullpen as well. I don't think he's a closer anymore at this point. I think the Yankees would love to keep him around. Injury issues have been a problem in the past. Aroldis Chapman, same thing, as well as command issues, plus the altercation he got in with Aaron Boone before the postseason, and they left him off the postseason roster. Tells you all you need to know about where Aroldis Chapman's career is headed. And that's kind of where things stand as far as the free agent market. Let's just check in on some of the other news and notes anyway from around the league anyway. The Yankees, as I mentioned, will extend a qualifying offer to Anthony Rizzo. If I'm the New York Yankees, I expect that to be picked up because I think the contract itself of $19 million is the payday I think Rizzo wants to get. Maybe he ultimately wants a long-term deal, in which case he would decline, but I still think he picks up that qualifying offer. Conforto, who didn't play the entire year last year with the New York Mets, anyway, free agents, he received a qualifying offer, had the injury issue that he was trying to rehab and be able to be back by the trade deadline. Obviously, it wasn't healthy enough at the trade deadline. Otherwise, the team probably would have brought him in and gotten some just to see what he has. But obviously, at this point, he's going to be a free agent on the market this year. And it sounds like Scott Boras is looking for a contract, much like Carlos Rodon got for himself last year with the Giants, kind of a 1 year plus an option to kind of prove himself in that $20 million range. I saw one projection out there, absolutely ludicrous projection, 6 years at 120 for Michael Conforto. I'm sorry, he didn't play all of last year. You don't know how healthy he is exactly. The fact that he missed or that he didn't come back after the trade deadline when teams could have had him for free and not having to give up any compensation for him aside from whatever they negotiate in the deal for Conforto, I mean, it was very telling to me about where the health of Conforto was, and especially now where Scott Boras is still talking about his health, how he's be able to get full extension on his swing, etc. Well, yeah, I would hope he's able to get full extension on his swing, but his full power there, that's the question. I don't think he's going to get 6 years at 120 that I've seen a couple of different pundits put out there for Michael Conforto. I already talked a little bit about Joey Gallo, so those are some of the other notes I want to kind of get over with you guys. Dusty Baker is re-signed anyway with the Houston Astros. He'll be back for 2023. The general manager, James Click, was offered a one-year deal by Crane, the owner of the Houston Astros. It seems like he's still contemplating his options. He and the owner apparently don't see eye to eye on how things should be done as far as on the field. Wilson Contreras apparently was offered to the Houston Astros, and Click declined the trade offer that Crane would have accepted. That seems to be the impetus behind this as well. But Click made the right decision. I mean, you didn't get the guy, Wilson Contreras. It ultimately ended up in a World Series title for you guys, so I'm not sure if James Click is the guy to blame there, or if it's just two guys who don't see eye to eye. You think Kershaw will go home and pitch for his hometown Rangers in 2023 and then retires in 2024? Kershaw's still fairly young, but he's got a lot of miles on that arm. That's the reason why people thought he might retire last year. I don't think he's going to retire this year. He still looked very effective to me. I think he found his second wind as far as how he wants to pitch this year as well, because you saw him pitch a lot differently this year to hitters. I mean, he's still very effective, don't get me wrong, but he pitched very differently than he had in the past. Very different pitch mix, sequencing, etc. And so I think if he does go to Texas, I don't think it will be his final year. I think he might have lengthened his career by the success he found changing up his arsenal this year with the Dodgers. Do I think he ends up going to the Rangers this year? For me, this is more about what else they decide to do on that team. If they stick with pretty much the roster they got and say, hey, let's roll the ball out there and just bring back Martin Perez and have Clayton Kershaw. I don't think that's enough to convince Kershaw to come in. If they do go out there and spend on a guy like Jacob deGrom, then you're looking at a rotation of deGrom, John Gray, Martin Perez, maybe Clayton Kershaw, Jake Odorizzi, and then they've got a plethora of young starters that already were on the roster this past season that they now can use in the bullpen. They had two really good left-handed options out of the pen last year in Matt Moore and Brock Burke. The one issue they do have in their bullpen is a closer. They don't really have a guy that can lock things down right now. A lot of guys who have been closers in the past, but nobody you look at and say, that's my guy, that's our closer, that's what's going to get it done. That's a guy that's going to save the win for you guys as you try to build your Hall of Fame resume up just a little bit more and get those career victories up just a little bit more. I think if I'm a Rangers fan, I really want to improve my starting staff. DeGrom is probably my top target. Rodon is probably my 1A, 1B target next to DeGrom. I want one of those two guys if I'm a Rangers fan. Kershaw, I think, is the Rangers beat reporters have already said they've set aside money for Clayton Kershaw if he wants to come. It sounds like they've gotten between $19 and $20 million earmarked for Clayton Kershaw if he says, hey, I'll go to Texas for 1 year or however long he wants to stay. I think the Rangers would be happy to have him for however long he wants to come to Texas. The Dodgers, I think they're in a different phase of their organization. They're still in the World Series conversation. They may want to reinvest those dollars differently and see him on the back end of his career. As I mentioned during the season, I think the Dodgers' title window is closing, so they're going to make decisions that are a little bit different than they have in the past. They had some good, surprising performances out of their starters this year, especially with the loss of Walker Buehler. They had to have those big performances to send out that money differently. But that's kind of where things stand right now for the Dodgers and the Rangers. Now, as far as closers, as I mentioned, Edwin Diaz is the top closer off of the market now. Maybe they go to the trade market anyway to try to bring a number one closer in, try to lock down the ninth inning. Remember that they sent out Emmanuel Clase to the Cleveland Guardians anyway a few years ago in that Corey Kluber deal. He immediately was suspended for PEDs, came back, and ultimately was an absolutely dominant pitcher for the Guardians. In my mind, he's probably one of the top 3 or 4 closers in the game right now. Rangers would really love to have that pitcher back. But there's some other options out there. Of course, Josh Hader went to the San Diego Padres. Things didn't go as well as the Padres would have liked and in his return, or in his stint anyway, in San Diego. But there's a lot of options out there to be had. Let us know in the comment section what questions you have about the offseason. There's a lot of rumors going on right now. Let me just check in to see if anything else has happened today while we've been on. Oh, let me flip it around. There we go. Appreciate you guys joining us. Let's see. 2 Korean stars could be coming to the United States as well to play. Kodai Senga, I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that name wrong, but we'll guess that that's the name anyway. He was one of the free agent starting pitchers coming over from Korea this offseason. The difference for him is he's not going to have to be subject to the posting system as normal. He is going to be an outright free agent, 31 years old, 1.84 earned run average, and I think he had a 27% strikeout rate in Korea. I could be wrong, but he should be a good option. It sounds like a number of teams are already talking to him. The Toronto Blue Jays. Haven't mentioned you guys a lot, but the Toronto Blue Jays are interested in a lot of free agent starting pitchers out there, and he would be a good fit. They've brought in international imports before, and they just work really well in Toronto. Toronto's a very big city, very culturally diverse city as well, much like New York is. Toronto's kind of the New York, if you will, of Canada, and so he'd be very comfortable there. Yoshida, another player anyway, who should draw plenty of interest. Great bat. We'll see what ends up happening there. We already talked about the Farhan Zaidi news anyway, talking about Aaron Judge. The quote is, I think from a financial standpoint, there's nobody that would be out of our capability, and then it's just a question of whether there's mutual interest. Wow. Sounds like the San Francisco Giants might actually have a blank checkbook for a guy like Aaron Judge. Wow. I mean, they've got money, don't get me wrong, but to give Aaron Judge, say they give him a crazy number. Say they give him $50 million a year over like 9 years. That would be ludicrous. The Yankees would have to, or would not be able to go up quite that high, but that might be what ends up getting it done for a team like the Giants if Judge wants to stay in New York. Now, if he wants out of New York, maybe he takes less. But all of the baseball reporters are now like, hey, Giants are actually serious contenders. Let's see. Scott Boras spoke with reporters today talking about all of his different free agents on the market, and he had a lot of interesting comments out there. Aaron Judge basically said he wouldn't be the judge of what type of contract he'll end up signing or what type of demands he'll have from his new team wherever he ends up going. Xander Bogaerts, how steady he is, etc. Trying to endorse his players as much as possible. There is the GM meetings right now going on in Las Vegas. That's why we see Scott Boras being interviewed while the reporters are there in Vegas. Again, just to remind you guys, we will be live for you guys during the baseball winter meetings. We will start that Sunday evening and do a live for you guys that evening just to kind of get you guys caught up on what's happened so far and just kind of get you teed up on what to expect over the next 4 days at the baseball winter meetings. That's, again, going to be the first week in December. More headlines showing how the Braves are covering the $10 million of Odorizzi's $12.5 million salary. Ridiculous trade, in my opinion, for the Braves, and a great deal for the Rangers because they get a number 5 starter for nothing. $2.5 million for Jake Odorizzi. I mean, the Rangers could have done a lot worse at that number 5 spot, I'll put it that way. The Hall of Fame era ballot, anyway, came out that 8 names were on it. The one surprise name, of course, was that Rafael Palmeiro was a little bit of a surprise on that list. The likes of Lou Whitaker were not. Fred McGriff is on it, though. Curt Schilling, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens. This will be probably the year Curt Schilling does get in via the player vote. I just don't think they're going to be able to keep him out now. The one thing with the era committee, though, is you can vote for as many players as you want. There's no cap on the players. And so as long as you reach a 75% threshold, we could see a few players get inducted this year, depending on how the committee sees it as far as the PED players or keeping them out. Maybe they just want the conversation to be over with and just say, hey, get in now. Or maybe they just believe that they should be in anyway. Maybe they'll go with Bonds, Clemens, etc., and allow that group in. Now, Rafael Palmeiro has really good career numbers. The one interesting thing is that he had he's never really, I'm trying to remember if he even had a failed test. He might have had one failed test, but he had that disastrous appearance in front of Congress, of course, and that kind of sullied his name around the world of baseball. He still was trying to play an independent ball at the age of 50-something years old this past season, and so he's been a baseball lifer, of course, but he was a little bit of a surprise on the era committee's ballot. So that's kind of some of your other news right now. A little bit of news out of Colorado is Chris Bryant, who was limited to 42 games after signing that big deal in a surprise anyway with the Rockies, is going to be the full-time left fielder next year for Colorado. Seems like they're going to retool that infield just a little bit. Awards are going to be handed out, I believe, this next week anyway, MVP, etc. We'll see who ends up winning the big-time awards. But free agency is definitely afoot. Trades are afoot. There's a lot of conversation, as you might expect, in the starting pitching market because of all the different options right now on the market. Looking at the Seattle Mariners, we haven't really touched on their situation. They have really good starting pitching for next year. They locked up Luis Castillo. We told you guys during that video, when that trade was made anyway, that as long as they sign Luis Castillo to an extension, the trade would be worth it. Otherwise, they gave up too much. Well, obviously, they got the extension done. They have 4 high-quality starters. They still have 2 other starters in that staff at the back end of that staff that they may end up flipping one of them. Possibly Chris Flexen is the guy that they may end up trading. Welcome in, Clay. Appreciate you joining us again. Yankees are going to be awful in a few years. They have no choice but to re-sign Judge. I think they have no choice as well. I think you're looking at a contract well north of $40 million if you're going to keep Aaron Judge, just because of the teams that are interested in him. I think the Giants are already willing to go up to that level right now. I think the only reason why he would stay in New York if he says, hey, I just like playing in New York. They're giving me a really good deal now. They're not laughing and spitting in my face by offering me 6 years, $212. But they're going to have a lot of money tied up again. As you mentioned, Stanton's got a lot of money still left on his deal. Garrett Cole's money going to be on the books for several years. And they still have some big money contracts out there as well. Aaron Hicks is one of their cheaper contracts, but he's over $10 million for the next few years. They got LeMahieu, I think, on a big deal last year. They still have the Donaldson contract for at least one more year, so that's a little bit of money to save. They're going to go young at shortstop. They're going to lose Tyone in free agency. Sounds like he's going to go for probably $16 million a year. If you bring back Judge, there's no way you can bring back Tyone. My worry last offseason is that they would run out of starting pitching. Lo and behold, they ran out of starting pitching. And let's see if I can be yet again another prophet for them. Sign a starting pitcher. Sign a starting pitcher. Let's see if it sinks in this time to Yankees fans. You're thinking it's 8 at 320? That would be a very respectable offer. I don't think the 8-year number is going to get it done, though. I think the Giants would be comfortable going up to a 10-year deal just to get the deal done. So 10 at 400, I think, might get the deal done just to break that 400 mark anyway. I mean, he still would be less than Max Scherzer is year to year. And you're still counting on him entering his age 31 season this year. That's a lot of money to give to a guy that age, but I think that's ultimately what the deal ends up getting done. So if I'm predicting a contract for Judge, 400 at 10, or 400 for 10. Maybe even higher depending on how the bidding goes. But my guess would be 400 at 10. Checking to see if there's anything else that's popped up over the last few hours. A lot of the Odorizzi news, etc. Just trying to sift through all of that. You think it's 350, 360 if it's 10? So you think you'd knock it down to, what, a $38 million deal? 37? Is that what that is? My math might be a little bit off. But I still think he's going to get 40. I think that's the starting number for him. Remember last year, Corey Seager anyway, got that 10-year, $325 million deal. A lot of that deal is front-loaded, so the back half of the deal isn't quite so bad for the Rangers. Maybe a team looks at the structure of that type of a deal and says, hey, if we can apply that structure at the figures Judge is wanting, maybe it'll be a little bit more palatable long term, especially considering that Aaron Judge is right here as far as free agent status right now. I mean, he's by far the best free agent to ever hit the market, in my opinion. He's going to cash in. That's why I think it's going to be over 400. I think there's the teams that are interested is part of the reason why it'll get over that. I think in years past, if the market had been similar to the teams that were interested in years past, then I think we were talking about something like that. Yeah, but Corey Seager's at a premium position, and he was already looking to possibly move off the position. That's, even as a Rangers fan, I knew by year probably 5, 6 of the deal, we're probably flexing him to a different spot, either more of a designated hitter or an outfielder in the corner or a third base, something like that. We never thought Corey Seager was going to be shortstop for 10 years. But by age 34, 35 of that deal, 33 maybe if his wheels really fall off. But he's a hitter who took a lot of different approaches this year, try to change things up. I think that was a bad mistake for him. That's part of the reason why I think the coaching staff was out in Texas anyway, especially now that they brought on Bruce Bochy anyway. We'll see if he gets back to being the old Corey Seager, maybe with a little bit more pop now that we've seen him, have a little bit more success with the long ball this year. Sounds like the Dodgers will indeed extend a qualifying offer to Tyler Anderson, according to John Heyman. Leave it to the Mets to do more deferrals. $26.5 million of Edwin Diaz's contract is in deferrals. $5.5 million in first 3 years, and then $5 million in years 4 and 5. Okay. More news out of Texas anyway. Of course, we already mentioned it. The Jose Leclerc is going to stay with Texas. He's one of those closers that's already on the roster anyway for the Rangers. If he gets back to being that type or that level of closer that he was before his injury, be a great move for the Rangers. Oh yeah, if you haven't heard the deal, the full deal for Jake Odorizzi, and $10 million go to Texas in exchange for Colby Allard. In case you're wondering, this offseason, Jake Odorizzi opted into a $12.5 million player option. That means Texas is only going to pay $2.5 million, basically giving up a player that they're already given up on. So it frees up a roster spot. They solve the fifth spot in their rotation, veteran leadership, that kind of a thing, just in case their young guys can't do anything anyway. But he has had injury issues in the past. We'll see if he stays healthy. But he is a good pro. He's a good innings eater. But the Braves are indeed paying a big chunk. But remember, the Texas Rangers are looking to spend between $60 and $75 million in free agency this offseason. Bruce, welcome in. How do you feel DeGrom will sign with the Mets? Well, the New York media is even saying that they don't think the Mets are going to be able to get it done. It sounds like DeGrom wants to take this thing to the winter meetings, really get a feel for the teams that he's talking to. The Mets don't want any part of that. They want to be able to get their signing done and move on to their next order of business like they did last offseason. That's why they got the Diaz deal done already. Coming from Joel Sherman and John Heyman anyway, saying that the Mets don't expect to be the front runner now for Jacob DeGrom if it gets past about a week or two into the offseason. If it gets past that, they don't see them having a realistic chance to keep him because they want to be able to solve a lot of holes in their lineup, and they can't really have the big question of, hey, do we need to set aside $40 million for DeGrom, or can we go ahead and use that money now? They need some answers from DeGrom and quickly. So thank you guys for joining us. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, please do so. It really does help us out. Appreciate a couple of you guys who already subscribed to us today. Lost AJ's, really appreciate that, and a couple other of you guys who have already subscribed as well. And thank you for liking the video. It really does help us out a lot. We'll see if we can cross that 900 mark by the end of this video. For those of you wondering, we're at 8:10 Central. Been going for a little while, but really appreciate all the support that we've been getting from you guys. You feel should let him walk because he's always hurt anyway. Okay. A little bit of pushback. I've already mentioned this before, but we'll go through it again. DeGrom is not injury prone. Repeat it with me. DeGrom is not injury prone. The injury that he had was a Tommy John surgery. That kept him out for the second half of 2 years ago and the first half of this year anyway. That's why he came back and was absolutely lights out. The year before, in 2020, everybody says, hey, you only threw 12 games in 2020. What's up with that? That's the COVID year. The best starting pitcher, the only starting, you were only scheduled to get between 12 and 13 starts that year in the COVID-shortened year. That's what he did. He pitched 12 to 13 starts that year, was healthy the full year, and hasn't really missed a lot of time outside of that since 2017. He's been very durable. The Mets really haven't had much going for them over that entire span, but he's posted every single day. His numbers really haven't fallen off at any point. Unlike Max Scherzer, he's the one I'm really worried about long term because in 2 consecutive years in the postseason, we've seen his arm kind of fall off. 2 years ago, when he was with the Dodgers, when he was traded there, we saw in Game 6 of was it NLCS anyway, he declined to pitch in that game, said, hey, Walker Buehler, I can't go, I've got a dead arm, I got nothing, you're going to have to go for me. Maybe it was just a one-time thing, but this year, we saw before his Game 1 start against the Padres, in the bullpen, he kind of had some funky movements that he was doing out there, had a conversation with a trainer and the bullpen coach out there, still went out there and pitched, gave up 7 runs, got kind of blown up. We saw that he wasn't exactly himself in that game, gave up more runs than he had the entire year, but it shows that as the season wears on, he's not exactly the strongest anymore. He was 2010, yeah. I'm still not worried about something that happened 12 years ago. But for my money, DeGrom has been very good, has only had the one injury in, 5 years plus? And he's still been one of the top pitchers in that entire time. Even this past year when he came back from the Tommy John, he was absolutely lights out as well. So again, I'm not worried about DeGrom. Okay. Did you know that in his 9 seasons in Major League Baseball, DeGrom has won a total of 87 games? I feel that's both a disgrace and a sign that he's not worth a lot of money. Wins basically are not very important anymore in the world of baseball. I mean, MLB network anyway has a show called MLB Now that shows how the win is basically team dependent as well. I'm sorry, there's a lot of issues other than just what's happening with Jacob deGrom that have gone into winning games or losing games for the Mets. Most of the time in the past, 5 years, deGrom would take the hill, would get one run of support or no runs in support and would give up literally one run, and that would be a loss for him. Those were the reasons why deGrom doesn't have as many wins for him. But as far as the not worth the money part, I can understand if you're worried about injuries just because of the arm issue he had, etc. I get it, but he's still worth the money. I mean, what exactly are you going to like if you want Jacob deGrom and you have three other teams that are interested in him? The Texas Rangers are willing to give him $40 million right now. I'm telling you right now, they're willing to give him $40+ million a year, easily over 3. I wonder if they're even willing to go to a level of 5 years. Absolutely crazy, but I'm telling you, there are teams out there willing to give him that level of money right now. If you're telling me the Mets, if you want to be in the conversation for a guy like deGrom, you have to be willing to pay at that level of price. If you're not, go ahead, wipe your hands, move on. Let the Texas Rangers have him. Let the Atlanta Braves or whoever else wants to get Jacob deGrom have him. But you're going to pay at least $40 million for him. I get the hesitation about a little bit of an injury issue from 21 to 22, but he was absolutely lights out after the deadline. Really didn't have any issues after the deadline. And before his arm issue last year, before he had the surgery, etc., I think that's what you're talking about, Clay. He was missing a few starts. I think he had a blister issue. I think he had a forearm strain. Those types of issues. That was what happened early on that season for him. I really don't think that impacts anybody's long-term thought process on Jacob deGrom. Maybe. I mean, a guy like Kershaw, that we were talking about earlier, I think that has a bigger weight on than most players out there. That's why I think the Rangers have a very big chance to be able to get a guy like Clayton Kershaw. But I think the Rangers really want to get that number one stud at the top of their rotation, and I don't think they'll be denied in getting a deGrom or a Rodon. I think they'll end up with one of the two. The Dodgers aren't going to be in on deGrom. They weren't at the level of Scherzer, and they already had all the medicals on a guy like Scherzer, which again could be the reason why they let him go. But they've already invested a lot of money in other places. They're looking at investing money in a guy like Judge or Turner because they don't really have the prospect depth from beneath right now to be able to supplement those spots. So they're going to have to spend. I just wonder if they're willing to spend that level of money on a starting pitcher when they got really good performances out of players who weren't exactly expected to do that, like Tyler Anderson. And they already still have Walker Buehler and Julio Urias as well in that starting staff. I do think the Dodgers should be adding a starter, don't get me wrong, but I don't think they'll be adding at the level of a guy like deGrom. They do have an amazing rotation, but it's limited. I mean, Dustin May is coming back from injury. They were very thin. They have Walker Buehler coming back from injury as well. But the Dodgers are not half as deep as they used to be. I mean, before the season even began last year, they only had 6 reliable starters that they could count as a starting pitcher. They, of course, got the big performance from Tyler Anderson this past year. I just wonder what exactly they're willing to pay for a starting pitcher. I know it's not the level of deGrom, but maybe a guy, around the 10 to 12 to $15 million range. And no, the Braves will not be paying for Judge at all. I mean, they already got their corner outfield spots their outfield pretty much lined up right now. They spent money on Ozuna a few years ago. That's the only bad money they really have on their books. They're looking to lock up their shortstop position right now, and that's about it. I could be convinced that they could use an outfielder, but not at the level of Aaron Judge. Bad news for the Dodgers, just getting reported right now. More bullpen issues for the Dodgers. Blake Trinan, who only pitched 5 innings this past year, was expected to be in that closer mix for them. Had the issue with his shoulder anyway. Sounds like there's even more damage than expected, but he will not pitch in 2023. So the Dodgers are going to need a closer. Maybe they end up going back to a guy like Kenley Jansen. He is a free agent again after the 1-year deal that he signed with the Braves. I think the Braves are going to save a little bit of money and go after or try to keep Swanson and try to bring in a nice or a good left field option on the cheap anyway. Maybe a guy like Pollock or a guy like Duvall could come back to the Braves anyway, and then maybe they go cheap again at closer with a guy like Colomé, or maybe they go with in-house or one of their own free agents in Luke Jackson. Checking up on any other news. Looks like that's about it as far as news that we missed today, but other news from around the league before this anyway. As I mentioned, the Red Sox were looking at backup second base options now that the Bogarts might end up leaving. Got a spammer here. We'll have that taken care of here by our moderator. The guy from the Angels, they did bring in Iglesias last year. He was great for them once they got the trade done. Yeah. Thank you, moderator. Really appreciate it. Maybe they end up going with him at closer. They do have a lot of money invested in him, and I think they took the whole chunk of money from the Angels as well, which is, kind of interesting. Just look at the two moves the Braves made. One, on one hand, bringing in Raisel Iglesias, eating all that money. Two, eating all the money to send out Jake Odorizzi, who they brought in at the deadline as well, in exchange for Will Smith. Just kind of the dichotomy of those two trades, taking on money and then still taking on even more money. Looking at those two deals alone, if they had decided to save money and not do those type of moves, then they would have all the money they need already for a guy like Dansby Swanson. Maybe they'd still have Will Smith or somebody else in that bullpen, but that's kind of an interesting scenario anyway for the Braves. Everybody thinks the Braves have done everything great. If the Braves had those two moves to do over again, I wonder if they say, hey, if we don't make the move for Iglesias, maybe we keep Will Smith and don't pay the contract of Odorizzi going out. I think they would like to have that one back, financially at least, overall. For those of you wondering, players that have already opted out, Jacob deGrom, Taijuan Walker, Carlos Correa, Xander Bogaerts, Jurickson Profar, Anthony Rizzo, Gene Segura, Jimmy Nelson, A.J. Pollock, Miguel Sano, Dylan Bundy, Chris Archer, Will Myers, Drew Smiley, and Danny Duffy have either opted out of their deal or had the club opt out of their deal as well. I'm not sure if he was. I'm not entirely sure. You could be right. I'm just curious now. You made me curious, Clay. I imagine he was making decent money. There he is. All right. Oh, they actually retained a little bit of money in a buyout type of a deal because he signed a 3-year, $40 million. So, yeah. Just did not work out. So, again, Braves spend a little bit of money on their bullpen, spent more with Iglesias. Very interesting moves for the Braves. Appreciate those of you guys who joined us today. We'll kind of wrap up here, kind of go over the highlights one more time. For those of you wondering, Jake Odorizzi, along with $10 million, was sent to the Texas Rangers in exchange for Colby Allard. We already mentioned the news about Trey Turner. He is likely to go to Philadelphia. I believe Philadelphia was already considering him as one of their 1A, 1B options with Xander Bogaerts. It sounds like Trey Turner wants to go to Philadelphia. A lot of media reports coming out about that this afternoon, and we'll see what ends up happening. But if you're a team like the Phillies, you already have a player interested. You don't want to necessarily hem and haw about it and let him go off to another team, especially with a player of his caliber. The other news, of course, Ohtani. It sounds like Manassian, the GM anyway, for the LA Angels, says he's not going to be dealt this offseason. That does not preclude them from trading him during the season. But I imagine if they get a great enough offer, they could be swayed to trade him this offseason still. I mean, just because you say you're not going to trade him doesn't mean a hill of beans right now in pretty much any professional sport. I think the Angels are indeed out of it for the division. They haven't really had a chance since the days, pretty much right at the beginning of the Mike Trout days. And that tells you, even with the best player on the roster, they haven't been able to create a roster good enough around him to get into the postseason. That's been the biggest problem. Ohtani came over to the United States to challenge himself against the best talent in the world, and obviously we see he's an MVP finalist right now, and that's even with a team that's not performing as well as he honestly expected. I'm pretty sure he thought he'd be at least in the playoffs a couple of times already, and it just hasn't happened yet. We'll see if that ends up happening if he stays with the Angels this year, or if he ends up getting dealt or signing somewhere next off season. So that's kind of your headlines right now. The other headline, of course, that Edwin Diaz signed that 5-year, $102 million deal. We'll be back with you guys tomorrow evening, kind of go over all the deals that are commiserated tomorrow anyway. But there's a lot of rumors out there. Make sure you guys follow us on Twitter at UpsideSN. Subscribe to us here on YouTube. We really appreciate those of you who have subscribed already. We're getting closer and closer to that 900 goal. We'll see if we can get there with it by the end of this one or by tomorrow's stream anyway. But thank you guys. Make sure you don't miss out on any of the short videos we'll have for you guys tomorrow afternoon. And thanks again. Appreciate all of you guys who joined us this season. Clay, Declan, etc. A whole bunch of you guys joined us during the baseball season. We really appreciate those of you who joined us. And we'll be back with you guys tomorrow night. We will be having some live games for you as well from the NBA, NHL, and the NFL as well. You think Show will be a Dodger in a year? I think that's very likely. I think if Judge leaves the Yankees, I think he's 100% a Yankee if Judge leaves. However, Yankees losing him and then having to go a whole year without Shohei Ohtani, I don't think Cashman is able to survive that at all if that happens. There will be a new GM if Aaron Judge is on another team and they don't have Shohei Ohtani before opening day this season. I don't think it'll happen. I think they will ultimately end up keeping Aaron Judge if I had to handicap as to which team ends up getting him most. But I wouldn't say it's better than 50% that he stays on the Yankees versus goes somewhere else. I think it's probably more like 40% Yankees, 30% Giants, and then everybody else who's interested, the Dodgers and the Rangers, of course, have a lot of money to spend. Would be a surprise if they end up going that route. But there's a lot of money in the game right now, and Aaron Judge is going to get his fair share of it. And I believe it's going to be at least $40 million a year. As I mentioned, $400 million for 10 years, I think is what ultimately he ends up signing for. West Coast is better for Asian players. Yanks are now third biggest checkbook behind Dodgers and Mets. Yeah, I mean, West Coast teams are usually better for them anyway, but there's a lot of teams out there that have now had experience with foreign-born players. I mean, even a team like the Tampa Bay Rays has found success with foreign-born players as well. But the Rangers have had good success as well with Yu Darvish. Padres now that he's on their club. Didn't have much success anyway with the Cubs, but they're having great success anyway with Suzuki. There's a lot of clubs out there that have a good rapport with international teams. But tomorrow free agency opens, yeah. There's a lot of money to be able to spend around. We'll see if anybody signs some early deals because a lot of these veterans that are 34, 35 years old probably will sign earlier, as we saw last offseason, because of the uncertainty of the market, etc. Now, because baseball's going to have a regular offseason, I wonder if teams are a little bit more hesitant to sign those type of players early on. Maybe hold off a little bit and see if they can get their price to drop a little bit more as they wait into free agency. Or if they agree to their number right off the bat, that'd be great for the team as well. But thank you guys for joining us here tonight. Again, we'll be back for you guys live tomorrow evening. We will be having a live game for you guys. I'm not sure which game we'll end up doing. There was a 9:30 game, I believe. I want to say it was hockey. Kings and Blackhawks, I think, tomorrow. I'm trying to read my board. It's like 30 feet away. But that could be the game we end up doing for you guys tomorrow night at 9:30. But again, we'll have a live game for you guys a couple of times a week from one of the three sports out there. But y'all have a great evening.